Good afternoon all. So I'm here to speak about a book that I have just finished, and that is The Homemade God by Rachel Joyce. I loved this book, and I loved it because it was not what I expected it to be. So this is about a world famous artist who is called Vic Kemp, and he relies very heavily on his 4 children who are now adults and like grown-up children since their mother passed away when they were quite young. I think when the oldest was around 12 and the youngest was a baby. And he's relied really heavily on his children throughout his life to help with his career and just bring themselves up. So they have quite a strong relationship, but there's obviously a lot of trauma around it. And he is obviously a world famous artist, and he is near, I guess, the end of his career. His son works for him as a gallery assistant, or studio assistant, should I say, sorry. And he is working on this big final piece, this famous piece, the last final one. And he has some news for his 4 children, and they're all very excited, thinking maybe he's finished his final piece. But what happens is that he announces that he is getting married to Bella May, who just so happens to be 50 years his senior. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, that is a bit of a shock to the 4 siblings. And he runs off to Italy, where they have a second home and that they've spent many a summer, and marries his young fiancée, Bella May. However, a few weeks later, he dies in the lake on the Italian island that they live in, a lake which he has swam for most of his life, and he is an incredibly confident swimmer. So that becomes a major shock again for the 4 children, and the 4 children travel over to Italy to deal with the grief of their dad, but also to deal with the aftermath of his wife, their new young stepmother, basically. And when I read the blurb of this book, I knew I'd enjoy it. I knew I would enjoy the story, but I don't think I realised how much I would devour this book. I read this in a day and a half. I couldn't put it down. I really wanted to know what happened in the relationships. I think this book writes about relationships of siblings incredibly well, the relationships between fathers and their children, and also grief. I found this book very raw, very honest. It doesn't fluff it up, and I really appreciated that. I could relate really well to this book because I've recently lost a parent myself, so I could really relate to the aftermath and how relationships and how people deal with grief very differently to how you think they would deal with grief. And I think this book covered that really well. I loved getting to know about Bella May, the fiance, and I think she was kind of cheeky. I really liked how she would poke the bee's nest, basically, of the siblings and feed into their weird and wonderful stories that they would make up. And there's a chapter near the end, I'm not going to ruin the story, but there's a chapter near the end where you see it from Bella May, the step mum's view. And I thought that was so beautifully done because it's so completely different to how the kids perceive to have happened. And you know, you never know anyone's life until you step into their shoes, and I felt I really stepped into her shoes and could see it from her point of view and why she did what she did. And yeah, I just thought that was such great writing skills, and I think it really made this book. So I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't 5-star, but a high 4-star, and I felt it really transports you to Italy and into the heat, and it just made me want to go to Italy, basically, and see the lakes and just enjoy the sunshine and sit in a villa eating all day every day. And I would highly recommend this book. I loved it, and I would love to know if you have read this book, or if you're going to read it, and what your thoughts were on it. So yeah, let me know what you think about The Homemade God.